Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today is a little unusual in that I'm going to do something I don't often do on the channel, which is to promote a Kickstarter. Now the Solaryn Dragoons are a range of 3D printable sci-fi soldiers like this fella here. He's actually the sample file that you can cruise along and check out at the link I'm going to include in the description. Now as of recording, there are 15 days left on this, and it is an absolutely massive range of infantry files and heavy weapons and such, which you'll be able to print at home. Now if you don't have a 3D printer, there are also commercial licenses which have been backed, and so far 10 people have gone for those, so you'll be able to pick these up from somewhere as people will be printing them and selling them so that you can get that. As well, the files will be available individually later at My Mini Factory, and I'll make sure to link to the creator's current My Mini Factory store in the description so they can go check out some of his other work. Now, this method works really well on these guys, and I'm pretty certain it'll work really well if you've got some Cadians or, say, Krieg Guardsmen that you want to paint. So all of the paints will be listed in the description below. As always, let's get started.
So after printing this guy and getting him ready for painting, I've gone ahead and hit him with a primer of uniform grey from the Army Painter. You could use Mechanica Standard Grey if you wanted a slightly darker finish, but because we're going to do most of this with shading, I would figure it's probably better to start light. Now, we're actually going to start by painting one of the smallest details first, and that's going to be his visor. Reason being, we're probably going to hit the helmet and everything, so we can use this as a tidy up stage later on. I'm just going to paint a little bit of matte white into here, and I'm not too fussed if I do strike, the rest of the face mask. It's not going to matter too much. Now you'll find in most cases it will probably take a couple of coats to get a solid white, even over a light grey, but don't worry, you don't have to be tidy with it. Now speaking of not being tidy, I've got Iyanden Yellow, one of the contrast colours, and we're going to apply this in a fairly uncontrolled blob straight over those goggles. One quick coat of this, and then we'll let that dry. That will settle into our recesses and give us a neat, very easy glow effect. Now that's still kind of a mess, but we are going to clean up the faceplate later. So for now, that's a very easy glowing effect on the goggles. We're going to move on now to his jacket and trousers, and for this I'm using Storm Vermin Fur. Yeah, I was about to call it something else, but it's Storm Vermin Fur. Big old brush, and you'll see we can go over this very quickly. Now I like Storm Vermin Fur because it's got a slight brownish, greenish tint to it, which is really handy when you don't want just a straight boring grey for a uniform. Even if you are going to paint, Urban Imperial Guard, black and grey, use Storm Vermin Fur instead. It will look so much cooler, and it's still grey. Now you'll see this covers wonderfully. We don't need to be terribly careful with this. Smack your camera around a little with your brush, that'll help too. And we're actually going to turn to Mechanica Standard Grey for all of the armor. And you'll notice this goes on a little bit darker than our uniform grey primer. So if you have got Mechanica Standard Grey primer spray, then you could use that and tidy up at this stage after you've done the Storm Vermin Fur. However, I'm going to cruise around now, painting all of his armor, plates on his chest here, and these little sections on his boots that he's got. When it comes to the faceplate, I'm going to swap on down to a smaller brush, and take a little bit more time around here, because I don't want to hit that yellow if I can avoid it. Now with those two colors applied, it's time to move on to doing some highlights for them. You'll see that visor came out pretty well. I'm quite happy with that. I have here one of my little makeup brushes, just a tiny wee thing, and some Terminator stone that I'm really working into the bristles there. What I'm going to do is just flick along the edge of the base there. Yeah, that's a pretty good result. That's what I want. And I'm going to, first of all, dry brush along the edge of some of the detail on the jacket. But as well, I'm going to get my brush at a rough sort of 45-degree angle to any hard edges on the armor and dry brush a highlight there using the same color. Now you're going to find in some areas that you do need to go over it a few times, and chances are good you're probably going to need to go back for some fresh paint now and then. But using this color, I am going to dry brush highlight all of the miniature that we've painted so far. Now, simple as that, both our jacket, trousers, and armor are all highlighted. But I'm going to go back to a little bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey again, and for example, on panels here, up on the side of his shoulder pad, where I want a slightly more defined edge, I can just go back with the base color and straighten that out a little bit. I would suggest you're probably not going to need to do this on a lot of the miniature, because once we shade this, some of this chalkiness is going to disappear, but on areas where you definitely do not want it, then just a second with the base coat will tidy that up nice and quick. Before we get to shading, we're going to paint in the leather details, and I'm using Eshin Grey for this. I want a nice dark, almost black. So his belt, his gloves, his equipment, and his boots. Quick coat of this will do the job. It'll go on looking quite light, but you'll notice as it dries, Eshin Grey darkens quite a bit. With most of our base colors applied, we can move on now to shading this guy. So we're going to start off with Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to apply this over all of the jacket, trousers, and the leather. So I want to be careful when I come near the, the armor sections. But otherwise, we're just going to apply a quick coat of this over the uniform itself to dull down that highlight dry brush a little and bring that color together. Once the uniform has dried, that's looking pretty cool actually. That dulls down that grayness quite a bit, but still leaves it looking the right shade that I was looking for. I'm going to go to a slightly smaller brush now, and we're going to use a Thonian Camo shade to shade in the armor. And you'll notice this isn't a very strong green, but it will dull that down a bit, and our recesses on the grey armor will look a nice shade of green. Now that might seem a rather long-winded way to get to the sort of brown and green uniform effect, but I think it gives you a neat sort of washed out look, which really suits these miniatures in particular. Now what I've got is some German grey. This is one of my favourite Vallejo colours, but you could use Corvus Black here if you wanted to stick purely to Citadel. I'm going to paint in his gun, and any other black details. I don't think there are any on this particular miniature, but anything I want to look hard and mechanical black. Let's give this a quick coat of this. Now for these guys, I'm choosing to go for an all black weapon. Sometimes you'll see really bright, shining metallic parts on them. I'm not going to. I like that sort of sinister black finish. What I have is a little bit of Iron Hand steel, and I am going to pick out just a couple of tiny details that I want to be metallic. So this little vent on the back of his armor here, this little dealy bopper, and anything like that. Does a quick coat of this now. Now if you would like to, you could shade in the weapon here with some Nuln Oil. I don't think you're going to need to. What I've got is Basalt Grey. This is from Vallejo, and I'm going to very lightly dry brush along some of the leading edges of the weapon, just to pick that out a bit. I'm using this because it has a very faint blue touch to it, which is really nice. If you did want to stick to Citadel, then a little bit of Dawnstone would work perfectly well here instead. Now finally, in the not necessary but looks cool if you do camp, I'm going to go all the way back to some Storm Vermin fur, and I'm going to highlight the edges of the leather details. Now yeah, we're using the same color that we did for his uniform, but because we've shaded it so much, you're going to see quite a marked difference in tone. So don't worry if this might look a little samey. It's not going to. Now once I've finished this, what I'm going to do is pop a varnish over him. I'm going to use some Vallejo matte varnish, and then pop a base on. We'll see what this fella looks like once he is all complete.
And there we have it, our Solaryn Dragoon is complete. Now I'm actually really pleased with that result. It came out a little more green than I was really expecting, and I think, in retrospect, I quite like how that looks. I really do think this would work particularly well on Krieg Guardsmen, and you could mix up the shades that you were using if you wanted a slightly different finish. So once again, this fella from the Solaryn Dragoons, 3D printed at home, all pre-supported files. Go check them out at the Kickstarter link in the description. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my wonderful producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support helps me keep doing what I'm doing here. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time on it all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.